Welcome. Today we have Dr. Toby Watson, who is a world renowned clinical psychologist who has championed ethical programming, treatment, and policy across the nation. He is an expert in beneficial approaches for the patient and has testified for both government and legal proceedings. He is one of only a few clinical psychologists with forensic experience supporting the rights of individuals to manage their own treatment and drug regimens. Dr. Watson is a former executive director of the International Society for Ethical Psychology and Psychiatry. He was also the chief psychologist for the state of Wisconsin Department of Corrections, KMCI, and a former disability examiner for the Federal Social Security Administration. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Toby.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and talk with you.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself and perhaps how you were introduced to 1 to 10 and then.
Sure. Yeah, happy. I'm now doing private practice. I used to run a doctoral training program here in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, so about an hour north of Milwaukee. And now I do a lot of consulting, both locally as well as nationally. I get involved in some relatively high profile cases sometimes when really bad things happen and people are taking psychiatric medications and maybe don't necessarily need to. And I travel a bit around the country and even the world sometimes, helping people get off psychiatric medications, or at least lower it or figure out what's really maybe going on for them. And so that's kind of the work I do. I also do real estate development. That kind of allows me to uh, do the work that I really want to do, and I'm able to have that luxury. And I kind of like balancing that entrepreneurial piece where I'm doing real estate development and restaurants and nightclubs and resorts and campgrounds, and then I can also do my clinical skills as well. And so it's a nice mix to have that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so because of doing some of that work, I got introduced actually to to the deck, to 1 in 10, um, and then. And it was through a mutual friend who had said,
Mhm.
"Hey, I've got this, this game, you might have an interest in." I thought, all right, what the heck? I'll take a look at it.
Mhm.
And and so I played a couple of cards, and then I said, this is wonderful. So I ended up purchasing them right off Amazon, which was easy to do. And yeah, we did it at Christmas. So I got the games at Christmas. Um, and I brought it out, and it was with my wife's family, extended
Mhm.
family, and we're all sitting
Mhm.
around. There's about 15 of us, I would say, and they're not exactly like me. They're not touchy
Sure.
feely, emotionally
Yeah.
involved, wanting to really kind of get into the nit and gritty of knowing people and really
Yeah.
expanding our relationships that way. They're kind of old school, just kind of reserved. They don't talk a lot. They don't get into touchy feely stuff. And so
So
this was go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, so what were your expectations going into playing that? Because that's quite a bold move. I mean, on one hand, you're introduced to the game, you're playing it, and you think, okay. I mean, you have some thoughts about it, and then next thing you know, you're introducing it to your family. What were your thoughts and what was your expectation?
Well, I didn't come in with any expectation at all. I
Okay,
usually am kind of that Buddhist mentality of just, what, hey, if you can't predict the future, don't worry about it. Can't
sure.
change the
See what
past.
happens.
Yeah, don't ruminate on it. Try to be
Yeah,
present. And so I kind of went in and said, hey, let's just see how this unfolds. I wasn't even sure if they'd be open to it, but I said, hey, you guys like
yeah,
to play cards, just
yeah,
normal, poker and stuff. I said, you guys want to play kind of a trivia-ish kind of game, except the trivia is about us. And they're like, oh, all right. And they were a little hesitant and a little like, I'm not sure I want to do this. And, oriented them to it all and read the instructions. Because again, I didn't even really understand how to play. And it was a quick read and easy to figure out.
sure.
And so I have to say, absolutely everybody freaking loved it. I mean, it was
Wow.
like the first, I mean, I've been with my wife 32 years. So we were high
Mhm.
school sweethearts,
Mhm.
I'm an old man now. And so 32 years together. And, we've just never really been able to connect on that level with her
Sure.
family. My wife and I
Yeah.
certainly do on a daily basis, but and our family, with my kids. But with her family, there's just never been a really good medium. Otherwise, they're like, oh, stop therapizing us or stop doctoring us or
Right.
stop trying to get
Right.
touchy feely with us. And this was just a natural, hey, this is kind of a fun thing to do.
Right.
And then to do the follow ups with everybody.
Yeah. So yeah, so how did it go? So you mentioned that they were interested. I mean, what transpired during that experience, and were they able to open up? Like, what was the follow up or the reaction or
Sure.
insights?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you ask a question of somebody, and then you
Mhm.
get the response, and then there's the discussion, which it kind of there needs to be, I think, one person initially to be that kind of coordinator, if you will,
Mhm.
facilitator, whatever you want to call it, because you encourage them to say, like, oh, wait a minute, now you gave that number, but this person gave this number. Why did you do that, or what was your thoughts
Right.
behind that? And once that everybody kind of figured out, like, oh, that's what we're doing after we give our numbers about, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you find myself in being flexible or find myself being, attentive to your emotional needs or whatever the
Mhm.
question might be.
Mhm.
It was interesting because some of us were on the money where we were really paired, yoked, if you want to call it
Mhm.
that. And we were very yoked and paired very well. And others were like way off. But with the
Mm.
explanation, then it made sense. So without
Yeah.
the discussion, you'd be like, well, what the heck was that for? But then
Yeah.
after people started talking, they're like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. And then it enriched, I think, the understanding of each other because we understood where were they coming from. So
Yeah.
it was nice. I mean, it was a good deep discussion. I mean, and it was thick, it
Yeah.
was enhanced. It was, I don't know what other adjective or what I can describe it.
Yeah. No, it is really the numbers portion kind of facilitates the and then portion of it, and that's as you said, it's really about understanding, and then I think that ultimately creates deeper connections, right? I mean, you can have um, more understanding, and then better relations, and then more harmony. I think ultimately in the types of contact you have with people. So how long did you end up playing the game with your family? Was it a short game
About
or
an
was it
hour or
longer?
about an hour and a half.
Okay, so that's pretty extensive. Yeah. No, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, and we did two of the decks. So I think we
Sure.
did the relationship deck, if I remember right, and the spiritual deck, if I remember right.
Okay. Wow.
I
Yeah.
think
So
I
the
have it here.
spiritual.
Yeah, here. Oh, the
Yeah.
self deck. Sorry, we
Okay.
did
So
the
you did the self and the spiritual deck.
yeah.
Yeah, I find those
Yeah.
those tend to be the easier decks to get to engage your family in, because they tend to talk about kind of uh, obviously yourself in the self deck, and then kind of the spiritual deck is more about things outside of you. They're obviously your beliefs and your ideas, but they're about about I guess, yeah, like I'm saying, the invisible forces, as I put it, that
Yeah.
guide our lives. So the relationship deck is a bit harder. Have you had a chance to play the relationship deck,
No, I
or are
didn't.
those the two decks that you played?
Those are the two decks that I was able to get. I think
Okay, all
I
right,
don't
well,
know if the relationship deck was out of stock at the time that I couldn't get it.
yeah,
Maybe I think that's
could
what
be,
had happened.
could be. We'll have
Which
to get
you
that
know
to
they're,
you.
they're flying off the shelf. So that's what your audience needs to know. If they're going to do it, they need to go to Amazon like right away. Go to the website and get it right away,
Yeah.
or they're not going to get it. They're just going to be left out in the cold. And out in the
Mm,
cold means you're not talking. It means you're not feeling, getting to know your family better. So.
sure.
All right.
Yeah. No,
How's
I
that for a
appreciate.
cheap, shameless plug for you?
Well, I appreciate that immensely. But given your background, obviously in psychology and therapy and that sort of thing, like, what was interesting to me after I heard that you had played it, that it resonated with you, and that you kind of went and played it with your family. I found that to be fascinating.
And I've done it with more people than that. I mean, that was
Oh,
the
you
first
have?
night. Oh yeah, that was the first night. Right when I got it, it
Okay.
was a prime
Okay.
opportunity. We did it a second time where we did a game night at our house, which we do about once a month, and we'll bring
Okay.
friends over. And I think we had about again 10, 12 people around our
Okay.
dining room table, and they were all people that some were single, some were
Yeah.
married,
Yeah.
some were dating and in relationships. And so it was a little bit of
Yeah.
everything. And some were 26 years old up to, I guess, 55 years old. So it was
Yeah.
an eclectic.
How did that experience go then with kind of non-family, because there tend to be some, I guess, I don't know, real strong attachments or ideas or real knowledge about one another, at least preconceived knowledge around family. Whereas with friends, it might be a little bit different. The conversation might flow a little differently.
It did, and it was more entertaining in a way, whereas it was more
Yeah.
enriching and deep and more serious. And
Yeah.
it was still fun, but it was a little more
Right.
serious with the family. Whereas you get a bunch of people drinking around a table, they
Right.
start calling you out like, "Hey, fuck you," and
Right.
they call you on your own shit. Put it that way,
Yeah.
and that's what it's about. Is you got to be able to say, "Hey, I can hold the mirror up to myself." And know thyself. And
Yeah.
sometimes we don't know ourselves quite as well as what we think. I mean, we're not all going to our own analysis like I did when I was becoming an analyst. So this is a good way for getting some really good feedback, critical feedback. Keep in mind some of it is projection, because that's
Sure.
the other piece, is that you are getting feedback from people who think they know stuff about you, but it could be their
Right.
own issue. And
Right.
that's the whole idea of know thyself. If you know
Right.
yourself better, then you know what's not about you. And that's one of my favorite mantras, is it's not about me. Because if you
Right.
know where your issues are, and somebody's projecting their own crap onto you and saying, well, you're angry, and you're not
Yeah.
angry, you're like, nah, that's not about me. This is about you. And so it's
Yeah.
kind of much more entertaining with more of a friend network as they're sitting around
Right.
drinking and stuff, because then we could kind of give each other a little more banter back and forth, and
Yeah.
they
And
got
I
a
think
little
the end
risky with the questions.
Yeah, the and then portion of it really swings the door open to have all sorts of types of conversations. At least when I've played it, the game starts off and then you might have a conversation about this, but as you said, it might turn into that, a projection that's going on with somebody, and then you can have that conversation. And I've seen the game flow in multiple ways where it's structured and organized, but then I've also seen it kind of just unfold a whole bunch of other things that were important and fun in that kind of atmosphere to discuss.
Yeah.
But I like what you said about projection, because you know it is just feedback on perception, right? And it's a matter of what you do with that information. I mean, it's not as though the others have a lock on what's going on with you, and it's not like you necessarily know what's going on with them or what's going on with yourself. And it's about facilitating kind of that reflection and then seeing what comes of it. And there's no like absolute answer in the
Correct.
end.
Yeah,
it's
and I think
it's
what you mean
just
is there's no absolute truth in this type
correct.
of reality.
Yeah.
Your sense of identity, is your identity, and you get to define that identity. You may have
Right.
done some behavior in the past, and that moment in time or that behavior was that moment in time, but that doesn't define who you are as a person
Right.
forever. And so
Yeah.
there's people who may only have sporadic contact with you. And so for that reason, they see you from a certain perspective. There's that old
Right.
Indian, I don't know if it's an analogy, but you get three men, blind men, that come up to the elephant and they question, like, what's the essence, or what is an elephant like? And the one comes up to the trunk of an elephant and they grab the trunk of the elephant and they say, oh, it's slender and sleek like a snake and it's
Right.
bendable. And the other man, blind man, comes up and feels the side of the massive elephant and says, this thing's like a wall. It's huge and flat. And then, the third person, comes up, to the tail end of the elephant and grabs that little tiny tail, which is very delicate and it's got a little fuzzy at the end, and says, oh, it's like a little mouse. It's small and delicate. Well, who's
Yeah.
wrong? None of
Right.
them. They're all right. And they
Right.
all have a piece of that overall idea of what an elephant is.
Right.
And I think that's what we as people get from other people. And that's why I think,
Yeah.
I go to court a lot. And I think that's why it's important. Sometimes I go up against a lot of doctors and other experts, and they get very angry because they think that they know the answer and they're right and this is what they have to do. And I was take a kind of a step back, going, I have a small piece of the puzzle here. I know what I've been given and the data and the evidence, and I've had interviews, and I know how this person presents to me. But the judge is the only one that really gets to see the full breadth of everything, other than
Right.
maybe the attorneys. And ultimately their decision, is the best decision because they got all the evidence and they got to see everything. Whereas I only get, my little part to it, which, I don't take personally then if it doesn't go the way I think it should.
Right. It is a matter of perspective, right? And we bring our own perspective to our lives. And I think people that are on kind of the spiritual journey, or the journey of self discovery, are really wanting to see a broader reality or a broader perspective. And that helps inform kind of the way we conduct our lives and who we are, and hopefully that leads to an easier time of all of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, that's what
As
it's
opposed
about.
to
I
just
think
sitting.
if you're not growing, you're kind of dead. And I think that's the
Right.
idea, is that we have to constantly evolving and growing, and trying to have a deeper
Yeah.
understanding of ourselves and others.
Yeah, and so I guess that leads me to my other question. Like, like you've played it now with family and friends. Like, who do you see as might maybe being a target for this, or maybe people that shouldn't play it, or whatever your thoughts on like who might benefit from this type of thing, or what kind of ideas do you have around that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in general, I'd say everyone would benefit from it, because I think anybody who does a self discovery is going to learn. Freud said, the a life not analyzed isn't maybe worth living.
Right.
And I think that it's especially maybe helpful for people who are a little not so mindful of their sense of identity, not so insightful to their own sense of self. So
Yeah.
typically women can be stereotypical, but and sexist. They tend to be more relationship oriented. They tend
Yeah.
to be more mindful of their inner workings of their self, their
Yeah.
feelings and thinking and whatnot. They're more eros, we call it,
Yeah.
emotionally sided, where men tend to be more logos, logical sided.
Mhm.
And so I think, from a targeting and marketing standpoint, you're probably going to have more females buying the deck. I would imagine, people who are interested in game night and activities like that, people who are probably in relationships already, or want to have a
Yeah.
deeper relationship with their kids or their
Yeah.
grandkids, or some spouses. I personally think that this would be a perfectly useful tool for team building within the corporate setting. Sometimes I do corporate retreat type work, where they're really looking for more of a diverse network of members within a team. And you don't want to get everybody who's extroverted. You don't want to get everybody who's introverted. You're going to want to have a certain mix, and you're going to want to have a certain group that's not going to be too conflictual, but enough that you're going to get out of that group think mentality where everybody's just on the same page. And I think
Yeah.
this is a good way of opening the doors to really get to know somebody better. And I think like a first date night, what a great way to kind of like, for
Yeah.
icebreaker and make it entertaining and kind of fun. So I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of ways that people are going to utilize this. And I think it's going to be a very interesting ride for you and your team as you see how this, business goes and this deck gets
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah, we've got other ideas, like you said, for business, and then I've thought, we've got plans for kind of a kids deck that would more meet them at their level, so younger ages, about topics that are important to them. So yeah, but the business thing has come up before, and I would definitely like to pursue that at some point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
yeah,
would just tell
well,
your audience, hey, it's not I've wasted a lot more money on other things that are silly and stupid. And you know what? This is something I think where people are going to drop, $30 or whatever the cost is now, $20, 25
mm,
bucks. And they're going to be like, wow, even if you play this once or twice, this is the cheapest therapy session or the cheapest way to get to know somebody better that you'll ever find. So,
yeah,
I would say to them, do it, give it a shot, have fun with it. And I guarantee you're going to learn something from it.
great. Hey, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing your experience and playing the game. It was great getting to know you a little bit better
Yeah.
through the game and through our mutual friends. So,
Yeah.
thank you again for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right,
Have a good
take
day.
care. Thank you so much.